Have you ever found yourself just staring at those really epic multi-volume book sets?
Oh, yeah?
You know, the ones they promise to tell the entire story of something huge and, well, complicated.
Totally. And you just think, how on earth do you even start something like that?
Right, let alone actually, created over a lifetime.
It's a pretty humbling thought, the sheer ambition involved.
Absolutely. And today, well, we're diving into perhaps one of the most ambitious historical works ever attempted by just two writers, Will and Ariel Durant's 11-volume magnum opus, The Story of Civilization.
Yeah, it's massive. So our mission today is basically to unpack what makes this series so unique, why it grabbed millions of readers, for decades, and what insights it might still offer us now, even though it was finished a while back.
We'll explore not just the history they wrote, but the story behind the writing, their really remarkable partnership, and the ongoing conversation about their work.
Sounds good.
Okay, let's unpack this.
All right.
So who are the minds behind this colossal project? What got them started on it?
Well, we're talking about Will Durant, born 1885, and Ariel Kaufman, born 1898. And their partnership, it was pretty unique right from the get-go.
How so?
Well, Ariel was actually Will's student, and they got married when he was 28 and she was just 15.
Wow, okay.
Yeah, that age difference, especially back then, was significant. It really marked the start of this incredibly unconventional but obviously enduring intellectual team.
And Will's own path to becoming this, well, epic historian is fascinating too, isn't it?
Absolutely. He started out as a philosopher. He even thought about becoming a Catholic priest at one point.
Really?
Yeah, before he sort of embraced more radical ideas and eventually got his PhD in philosophy.
Okay.
But the key thing, really, was his earlier book, The Story of Philosophy, came out in 1926.
Right, I've heard of that one.
It was a massive bestseller. And that success, well, it gave him the financial freedom to quit teaching and pursue what he said was a lifelong dream, something he had apparently thought about since 1904. The Story of Civilization.
Just the scale of it is mind-boggling.
It really is.
11 volumes, published over 4 decades, right? Like 1935 to 1975.
Exactly. 40 years of work, and it totals, what, 13,500 pages or something like that?
13,549 pages. Just imagine the research, the writing.
Yeah, it puts most projects to shame, doesn't it?
It really does.
And what's really compelling about their partnership is how it changed over time.
Yeah.
Ariel, initially she was just credited in the acknowledgments.
Yeah.
But from volume 7, The Age of Reason Begins, she became a full co-author, which, finally recognized her crucial role in the whole thing.
And they got some serious recognition for it.
Oh, definitely. They won the Pulitzer Prize for General Nonfiction in 1968. That was for Rousseau and Revolution, Volume 10.
Impressive.
And then they got the Presidential Medal of Freedom in 1977.
So it wasn't just an academic thing, it really reached people.
Hugely. The series sold over 2 million copies, translated into 9 languages. It was picked up by the Book of the Month Club all the time.
Wow.
So yeah, they really cemented their place in popular history writing, reached a massive audience that was clearly hungry for these big sweeping stories.
And outside the books, they were active too.
Yeah, they were pretty vocal advocates for social justice stuff, women's suffrage, equal wages, fair working conditions, and their own relationship, this kind of intellectual love story. They even wrote about it in a dual autobiography.
Fascinating couple. Okay, so if you're going to write the story of civilization, you kind of have to define civilization first, right? How did they tackle that?
They did exactly that. In the very first volume, our Oriental Heritage, they actually dedicated a whole introduction to it.
Okay.
It's called The Nature and Foundations of Civilization. And it basically lays out their blueprint, their framework for the entire series, how they understood human progress.
And they came up with, what, 8 key building blocks?
That's right. 8 foundational elements. They started with labor.
Makes sense.
Seeing that huge shift from hunting and gathering to settled agriculture. Plus innovations like, domesticating animals, fire, tools, pottery, weaving.
The basics.
The absolute basics. And they specifically highlighted the role of women in early food gathering and farming, noting how humans went from being, in their words, savages who gorged themselves or fast.
Language of the time.
Language of the time, absolutely, to having agricultural foresight, planning ahead.
Okay, so from labor, you need organization, so government.
Exactly. They traced how societies moved from just cooperating when needed in primitive groups through clans and tribes eventually to formal states.
And what drove that?
They argued that war and acquiring property were big catalysts, driving the need for more structure,
Right.
which then led naturally to law. They saw it evolving from personal revenge, eye for an eye, to systems of compensation, and eventually becoming essential for protecting property and just holding society together.
Okay. Labor, government, law. What's next?
Morality. They saw customs as the routine that keeps men sane,
Interesting phrase.
isn't it? And morals as a kind of law built into the spirit. It's that underlying code of behavior.
And tied into that often is religion.
Very much so. They traced its origins back to, fear of death, wonder, hope for divine aid, basic human experiences. They saw its vital role in unifying early societies, but also noted how it eventually came into conflict with, growing scientific knowledge.
Which brings us neatly to science.
Yeah. They pointed out its very practical roots in farming and astronomy, figuring out seasons, stars, which then spurred amazing advances in math, things like what we call Arabic numerals and the decimal system, which actually came from India.
Right.
Early calculations of pi, even ideas about atomic structure and physics, and surprisingly effective early medicine, surgery, vaccination, even anesthesia in some forms.
Wow.
It's fascinating. They have this line, magic begins in superstition and ends in science. Shows that progression.
Love that. Okay, so we've got the practical, the organizational, the spiritual. What about higher thought?
That's where philosophy comes in. They described it as the hunt for total perspective, a brave and hopeless inquiry, as they put it, into first causes and final meanings.
Grave and hopeless, huh?
Yeah, quite a take. And interestingly, they brought up the Upanishads' view on the limits of the intellect for finding ultimate truth, suggesting other paths to understanding.
And the final element?
Letters, which covers everything from language development gestures to speech to education, like oral traditions, apprenticeships, the invention of writing itself, from simple trademarks to alphabets, and finally, literature, the written expression of culture.
So these 8 elements, they really paint a picture of a whole society, don't they? From survival right up to art and philosophy.
Exactly. It shows their belief that civilization is this complex interplay of all these different facets. It's holistic.
And thinking holistically like that, it led them to make some pretty memorable, sometimes provocative statements, didn't it?
Oh, absolutely. They weren't shy about big generalizations, like a nation is born stoic and dies Epicurean.
Quite the judgment. What else?
This one's powerful. Civilizations are the generations of the racial soul. It suggests this kind of cyclical rise and fall of collective identities. Again, using language reflecting their era's concepts of race.
And they had some pointed observations, too.
Definitely, like this zinger. There is hardly an absurdity of the past that cannot be found flourishing somewhere in the present.
That still feels pretty relevant today, actually.
Doesn't it? And on government, they had a strong take. The worst conceivable government would be by philosophers.
Ouch. So much for Plato's philosopher kings.
Right, and maybe a bit poignant. This is the tragedy of almost every civilization, that its soul is in its faith and seldom survives philosophy.
Wow, that's deep. Suggests a tension between belief and reason.
Yeah, and perhaps the starkest one. Civilization is an occasional and temporary interruption of the jungle.
Goodness, that really puts their whole massive project into a kind of cosmic perspective, doesn't it?
It certainly frames the stakes as they saw them.
Okay, so we've seen their framework, their big picture view. Let's look at how they actually applied this in Volume 1, Our Oriental Heritage.
Right, so this first book, it covers a huge sweep. Near Eastern history up to Alexander the Great's time, basically the 330s BC, and then it jumps across to India, China, and Japan, bringing their stories right up to the 1930s when the book was published.
Starting in the Near East.
Yeah, they cover the real cradles of civilization. Sumeria, which they saw as the earliest, then Babylon, building on Sumerian foundations, and Assyria, inheriting and, often militarily protecting that legacy.
Assyria had a reputation, right?
Definitely. They're depicted as very militaristic, known for brutal tactics, strict laws. But Durant notes that they also had periods of real cultural achievement, too.
And Judea.
Described as this vital crossroads for trade, but also constant conflict. They trace Hebrew religion evolving from polytheism towards monotheism, highlighting figures like the prophets Amos and Isaiah, and the huge unifying impact of the Book of the Law.
Now, you mentioned India earlier. Durant had a special interest there.
He really did. This is where I think the book gets particularly interesting for its time. He actually lamented what he called the recency and inadequacy of Western knowledge about India's history. He called it a new intellectual continent for Western readers, which tells you something about the perspective back then.
So what did he focus on in India? Religion seems key.
Hugely important. They dive into the sheer diversity. They discuss ancient skepticism, which kind of set the stage for movements like Jainism.
Mahavira, asceticism, nonviolence.
Exactly. And of course, Buddhism. Buddha's life story, the Four Noble Truths, the Eightfold Path, Nirvana, focusing more on practical ethics than, say, complex theology.
And how did they contrast that with Hinduism?
They presented Hinduism as this vast, complex pantheon Brahma, Vishnu, Shiva, and explored core concepts like karma and reincarnation. But what really struck them was the level of tolerance they perceived between these different belief systems.
Interesting. And beyond religion, science.
This is a major point they make, highlighting India as pioneers. Contributions in astronomy, they mention Aryabhata, who had ideas about the Earth's motion and calculated pi pretty accurately.
Wow.
And crucially, the origins of what we call Arabic numerals and the decimal system. That came from India.
That's fundamental.
Absolutely. Also, independent development of algebra. And significant advances in medicine. They mention scholars like Sushruta and Charaka, early forms of vaccination, even anesthesia.
Incredible stuff. What about philosophy?
They touched on the major schools, the 6 systems of Brahmanical philosophy, things like Nyaya, focusing on logic, Vaisheshika on the nature of reality, Yoga on discipline, Vedanta on the unity of the soul, and the ultimate reality. A huge range.
Seems like a lot to cover.
It is. They also touched on society, the challenges of the landscape, economic ups and downs, the Code of Manu, the caste system.
Right. The caste system is obviously a big topic.
Yes. And they noted the strict moral codes and gender inequalities present in some traditions, like Purdah, the seclusion of women, or Suti, widow immolation. But even while noting these difficult aspects, they emphasize India's notable cultural achievements.
Okay, so a complex picture. What about East Asia, China, and Japan?
They covered them too, though maybe not with quite the same depth as India in Volume 1. For China, they talked about its vast history, but focused culturally, especially on the rise of Confucius and his huge influence.
Understandable, given his impact.
Yeah, and for Japan, they highlighted major cultural strides, particularly in literature, mentioning Lady Murasaki's Genji Monogatari as a world classic, and also achievements in art and aesthetics.
So, okay, this massive series comes out over decades. How did people react? How was it received?
Well, you've got 2 sides to the coin, really. On one hand, it was incredibly popular, a huge success with the general public.
Why do you think that was?
People just loved their writing style. It was engaging. The prose was often described as having beauty and clarity. They made really complex history feel accessible to, the intelligent general reader.
So not necessarily academics, but curious people.
Exactly. For lots of readers, it was really enlightening. Many called it a catalyst that sparked their interest in history, made them want to learn more.
That's a huge achievement in itself, inspiring that noble curiosity, as you called it.
Absolutely. It connected with millions. But then there's the other side, the academic critiques.
Ah, okay. What were the main criticisms from historians?
Well, they started pretty early, back in the 30s, and continued. One major area was just factual accuracy and dated information, accusations of innumerable errors, sometimes wild guesses, and simply the fact that history moves on, right? Later, archaeological finds happened after parts of the series were written.
Like the terracotta warriors you mentioned.
It's exactly. Discovered in 1974, our Oriental Heritage was published in 1935. So, inevitably, some information just became out of date.
Fair enough. What else?
Issues of bias and interpretation. Some critics felt it was cheap romanticizing of the past. Others pointed to an ethnocentric bias or a Western-centric focus.
Even in the volume called Our Oriental Heritage.
Well, yeah. The argument was that despite that title, the vast majority of the entire 11-volume series ended up focusing much more heavily on European history.
Okay.
And then there were more serious concerns raised by some critics about certain views expressed, especially around race and governance.
Such as, and just to be clear, we're reporting what the critics said here.
Right, absolutely. So some sources point to discussions about the essential sameness of races, or references to the now largely discredited Aryan invasion theory for India.
Okay.
Or ideas about a rugged north, conquering an easygoing South as a pattern in history. Again, these reflect certain historical theories of their time.
And about governance.
Some critics perceived a distrust of democratic forms in their writing, maybe a contempt for the mob, and a preference for strong leader heroes driving history. These are interpretations, of course, based on the text.
Okay, so a lot of serious critiques alongside the popular acclaim. What does this all mean for someone thinking about reading the Durants today? Should they bother or just dismiss it?
Well, I don't think it's an either. You absolutely have to acknowledge the criticisms.
Right.
Yes, the series is old. Yes, it contains biases from its era. Yes, historical and archaeological understanding has advanced enormously since then. It's definitely not the final word, and it has real flaws. But despite all that, I think it still has value. It's a fascinating time capsule. It gives you insight not just into the history they're writing about, but into the worldview, the assumptions, the way people thought in the era it was written.
That's an interesting point. It tells us about the mid-20th century, too.
Exactly. And it offers that grand narrative, that big picture story that, frankly, you don't get as much in academic history today, which tends to be more specialized. So it can still be a really useful resource, maybe a jumping off point. You read a section that grabs you, and then you go find more current, more nuanced scholarship on that specific topic.
So use it as a starting point, but with critical awareness.
Precisely. See it as this, fundamentally flawed but earnest attempt to grasp the immense diversity of human culture and history.
Yeah.
Will Durant himself famously said something like, "All history is guessing, and the rest is prejudice."
Huh.
And if you take that view, maybe their massive effort, with all its imperfections, is still a kind of triumph of popular scholarship. You got people thinking about the past on a grand scale.
So wrapping up, we've journeyed through this immense story of civilization by Will and Ariel Durant, a series that, yeah, it's got its age, it's got its issues, but it clearly continues to spark thought about the whole tapestry of human history.
It really does leave a legacy, flaws and all.
So here's a final thought to mull over. If history really is like the planks of a shipwreck, as Durant suggested, meaning way more is lost than ever saved, what's our responsibility as, curious learners? How do we both appreciate these big stories that get passed down and critically question them, look for the missing pieces, try to build a fuller, more nuanced picture of our shared past?
That's the ongoing challenge, isn't it?
It really is. What part of that shipwreck will you choose to dive deeper into next?